There is a moment most people can remember with unsettling clarity. A moment when something felt off, even though everything looked fine on the surface. The conversation was pleasant, the smile was warm, the words sounded right, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet signal went off. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle sense of tension, like your mind noticed something your emotions weren't ready to accept. Most people ignore that signal, not because they are foolish, but because they are human. The Stoic philosophers understood this weakness better than most modern psychologists. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius wrote that people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments they form about them. And one of our most dangerous judgments is this, that charm equals goodness, and confidence equals virtue. In today's world, that mistake costs people their peace, their time, their relationships, and sometimes their entire sense of self. This is not a video about villains in movies. It's about something far more uncomfortable. It's about ordinary people who quietly, consistently cause harm, often while appearing intelligent, likable, or even admirable. The Stoics did not use the word evil lightly. They did not believe in monsters hiding under the bed. They believed in something more troubling, people who had abandoned reason, virtue, and empathy, and replaced them with manipulation, appetite, and control. And the danger, as Seneca warned, is that these people rarely announce themselves. They blend in, they succeed, they are often rewarded. If you live long enough, you will meet them, at work, in friendships, sometimes even in your own family. The purpose of this reflection is not fear, it is clarity, because clarity is protection. And the Stoics believed that once you see clearly, no one can truly dominate your inner life again. Now let's slow this down. Think about the last time someone entered your life and made a strong impression almost immediately. They seemed unusually engaging. They listened closely. They made you feel understood, maybe even seen. You might have thought, this person is different. That reaction is not accidental. Human beings are wired to trust confidence, fluency, and emotional attunement. Our brains interpret these signals as safety. But the Stoics warned that what feels good initially is often the least reliable measure of character. Epictetus taught that character is revealed over time, under pressure, when desire is frustrated and ego is challenged. Not when everything is easy, not when someone wants something from you. This is why the first sign is often the most seductive and the most dangerous. The seduction of charm. Some people enter a room and immediately command attention. They know how to read the atmosphere. They know how to adapt their personality to whoever is standing in front of them. At first, this feels magnetic. They laugh at the right moments. They ask the right questions. They mirror your values, your frustrations, even your language. You feel an instant sense of connection. But here is the Stoic warning. Virtue does not need performance. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a good person does not need to proclaim their goodness. It is evident in consistency, not intensity. Charm, when used as a tool, is not about connection. It is about influence. Over time, patterns emerge. The charming person subtly steers conversations back to themselves. They dominate the emotional center of every interaction. Your stories become footnotes in their narrative. At first, you excuse it. They're just confident. They're passionate. They've had a hard life. But observe carefully. Do they listen, or do they wait for their turn to speak? Do they show curiosity, or do they collect information? The Stoics believed attention is never neutral. Where someone places it reveals what they value. A person who values themselves above all else will eventually reveal it, not through words, but through repetition. And when that charm is challenged, when they are ignored, contradicted, or denied, something shifts. The warmth cools, the humor sharpens, the patience disappears. This is where many people experience confusion. How did we get here? They were so kind in the beginning. Seneca would say, because the mask has a purpose, not a soul. Charm without virtue is not kindness. It is strategy. Why smart people miss this. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Intelligent, thoughtful people are often more vulnerable to these personalities, not less. Why? Because intelligent people look for coherence. They look for explanations. They assume complexity where simplicity would be more accurate. Instead of seeing behavior as a pattern, they interpret it as context. They're stressed. They didn't mean it. I probably misunderstood. The Stoics warned against this exact habit. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, stop explaining away what is obvious. When someone repeatedly shows you who they are, believe them, not because you are cynical, but because you are rational. A manipulative person benefits from your generosity of interpretation. They rely on your intelligence to doubt yourself. The absence of empathy. The second sign is quieter, but far more destructive, a lack of empathy. Not emotional coldness in moments of exhaustion, not awkwardness, but a consistent inability to register the emotional reality of others. These individuals do not respond to pain, they analyze it. They do not share joy, they compete with it. When you speak about something difficult, they redirect. When you succeed, they minimize. When you struggle, they grow impatient. Marcus Aurelius wrote that human beings exist for one another. To act against this is to act against nature itself. Empathy for the Stoics was not sentimental. It was logical. If we are social creatures, harming the social fabric harms us all. A person without empathy does not feel this connection. They understand emotions cognitively, but not morally. This is why they can justify cruelty without guilt. In modern terms, they may appear high-functioning. They may be productive, articulate, even admired. but observe how they treat people who can offer them nothing. Service workers, subordinates, those in emotional distress. The Stoics paid close attention to this. Seneca wrote that power reveals character more reliably than comfort. A person who lacks empathy uses people as instruments, and instruments, once worn out, are discarded. The slow erosion of self-trust. The danger here is not just their behavior, it is what happens inside you. You begin to hesitate before speaking. You soften your opinions. You replay conversations in your head. Was I too sensitive? Did I overreact? Maybe this is normal. This is not accidental. A person without empathy has no internal resistance to destabilizing others. They are not disturbed by your confusion. They benefit from it. The Stoics believed the greatest harm is not physical injury, but the corruption of judgment. Once you doubt your perception, you become easier to guide. The architecture of manipulation. Manipulation is not always loud. In fact, the most effective manipulation feels like cooperation. It feels reasonable. It feels subtle. It feels like compromise. But over time, you notice a pattern. Their needs are non-negotiable. Yours are flexible. They frame their desires as necessities. They frame your boundaries as inconveniences. If confronted, they do not reflect. They deflect. They may use guilt. They may use flattery. They may use moral language. If you cared, you would. If you were more understanding. If you trusted me. Epictetus warned that when someone tries to control what is not theirs, your thoughts, your choices, your values, they reveal their own inner disorder. A rational person respects autonomy. A manipulative person resents it, because autonomy limits control. Why this matters now? In a culture that rewards confidence, speed, and persuasion, these traits are often mistaken for leadership. But the Stoics made a crucial distinction. Influence without virtue is dangerous, not because it is dramatic, but because it is quiet. It enters your life disguised as opportunity. It reshapes your decisions gradually. It costs you pieces of yourself you don't notice until they're gone. This is why the Stoics emphasized vigilance, not suspicion, but awareness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should meet people expecting selfishness, ignorance, and inconsistency, not to harden your heart, but to protect your mind. When you stop being surprised, you stop being controlled. And in the next part, we will go deeper. We will examine how manipulation evolves into control, how control disguises itself as care, and how pathological dishonesty fractures reality itself, not just relationships. Most importantly, we will explore how a Stoic mind remains free, even in the presence of deeply toxic people. Because freedom for the Stoics was never external, it was always internal, and it is still available to you. There is a moment when manipulation stops feeling subtle. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It doesn't announce itself. it grows. At first, it feels like guidance. Then it feels like pressure. Eventually, it feels like a cage. The Stoics understood this progression with frightening clarity. They knew that when manipulation goes unchecked, it does not remain psychological for long. It evolves into control. And control, in Stoic philosophy, is the clearest sign that reason has been replaced by appetite. Control, disguised as care. One of the most dangerous forms of control is the kind that pretends to protect you. It sounds like concern. It sounds like advice. It sounds like experience. I'm just looking out for you. I know how this ends. You're too trusting. At first, you may feel relieved. Someone seems invested in your well-being. Someone appears to understand the risks you don't see. But the Stoics would urge you to pause here. Marcus Aurelius warned that people often confuse domination with leadership and interference with wisdom. A person who genuinely cares about you strengthens your judgment. A controlling person replaces it with their own. Over time, the message shifts. You begin to hear subtle discouragements. That job isn't really for you. Those people don't have your best interests at heart. You're better off sticking with what you know. Notice what is happening. Your world begins to shrink. Choices that once felt open now feel risky. Opportunities feel dangerous. Independence starts to feel irresponsible. The Stoics believed freedom was not the absence of responsibility, but the ability to choose in accordance with reason. Control erodes that ability slowly until fear replaces judgment. The psychology of dependency. Control thrives on dependency. The more you rely on someone emotionally, financially, or socially, the easier it becomes for them to shape your decisions. This is why controlling individuals often involve themselves deeply in your routines. They want to know where you are, who you're with, what you're thinking. They frame this as closeness, but closeness that requires permission is not intimacy. Epictetus taught that no one can enslave a free mind, but many people willingly surrender their freedom in exchange for certainty. A controlling person offers certainty. They offer answers. They offer structure. They offer a sense of direction. But the cost is autonomy. In modern American culture, this often shows up in subtle ways. A partner who insists on managing all finances for efficiency. A boss who expects constant availability for the team. A friend who resents your independence because things used to be better. Each example has one thing in common. Your boundaries are treated as obstacles. Surveillance as a form of control. One of the most corrosive expressions of control is surveillance. Not always literal cameras or messages, but psychological monitoring. You feel watched. You edit yourself before speaking. You hesitate before making plans. You anticipate reactions that haven't happened yet. This internalized control is the most effective kind. Seneca warned that the worst tyrant is the one who does not need to be present. When fear lives inside you, the external authority becomes unnecessary. This is why controlling people react strongly to unpredictability. If you change plans, if you assert a boundary, if you grow without them, they may accuse you of betrayal. They may question your loyalty. They may frame your independence as rejection. But the Stoics were clear. Loyalty that requires self-erasure is not virtue. It is submission. Emotional blackmail. When control is challenged, it often escalates into emotional blackmail. This is where the language becomes heavier. After everything I've done for you, if you leave, I don't know what I'll do. You're hurting me by setting these boundaries. These statements are designed to create guilt, not dialogue. A Stoic would ask a simple question. Is this an appeal to reason or an appeal to fear? Marcus Aurelius advised that when emotions are weaponized, clarity must become sharper, not softer. You are not responsible for another person's inability to regulate their emotions. You are not obligated to sacrifice your mental health to preserve someone else's comfort. This distinction is critical. Pathological lying and the fracturing of reality. Control becomes nearly absolute when it is reinforced by lies. Not occasional dishonesty, not avoidance, but systematic distortion of reality. Pathological liars do not lie to avoid consequences. They lie to construct a world in which they are always justified. They revise history. They reinterpret conversations. They deny things you clearly remember. This is not random. It is strategic. When reality becomes unstable, authority fills the gap. The Stoics believed truth was the foundation of inner peace. Without it, the mind cannot rest. A pathological liar makes rest impossible. You replay conversations. You doubt your memory. You search for certainty in their explanations. This is where gaslighting takes root. Epictetus warned that when someone tries to make you doubt your own perceptions, they are attacking the core of your agency. A person who controls reality controls behavior. Why pathological liars are so convincing. One of the reasons pathological liars are so dangerous is that they often believe their own stories. They are not nervous. They are not hesitant. They are fluent. Confidence is mistaken for truth. In American culture especially, confidence is rewarded. It signals leadership, competence, and credibility. But the Stoics rejected this shortcut. They judged truth by consistency over time, not by intensity in the moment. A liar can maintain intensity. They cannot maintain consistency. Contradictions emerge, stories change, details shift, but only if you pay attention. Most people don't, because paying attention requires discomfort. It requires accepting that someone you trusted may not be who you believed. The Stoic response to lies. The Stoics did not recommend confrontation for the sake of confrontation. They recommended withdrawal of trust. Trust for them was not an emotional state. It was a rational judgment based on evidence. When evidence changes, judgment must change with it. You do not need to convince a liar that they are lying. You need to stop relying on their version of reality. This is an internal decision, not an argument. Seneca wrote that peace comes not from changing others, but from no longer needing them to be different. The hidden cost of staying. Many people stay in controlling or deceptive relationships longer than they should, not because they are weak, but because they are invested. Time, history, shared experiences. The Stoics acknowledged this pain, but they also warned against the sunk cost fallacy long before modern economics named it. Just because you have endured something does not mean you must continue enduring it. Endurance is only virtuous when it serves reason. Otherwise, it is self-betrayal. Reclaiming inner authority. The Stoics believed the ultimate form of freedom was internal authority, not dominance over others, not escape from difficulty, but sovereignty over one's own judgments. This begins with a shift. Instead of asking, "How do I make this person change?" you ask, "What am I tolerating that contradicts my values?" Control weakens when you stop negotiating with it internally, when you stop explaining, when you stop justifying, when you stop minimizing. Clarity returns gradually. You notice how your body reacts around certain people. You notice patterns instead of excuses. You notice relief when distance is created. These are signals. The Stoics trusted these signals, not emotionally, but rationally. Your nervous system often detects danger before your intellect catches up. Boundaries as an act of philosophy. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are statements of reality. I will not participate in conversations that involve humiliation. I will not justify my need for space. I will not explain my values to someone who consistently disrespects them. A Stoic boundary is calm, not aggressive. It does not threaten. It does not persuade. It simply exists. And this is where controlling individuals reveal themselves most clearly. A person who respects you will adjust. A person who needs control will escalate. Anger, mockery, victimhood. These reactions are information. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when someone reacts badly to your virtue, it is proof that virtue was necessary. The quiet power of detachment. Detachment is often misunderstood. It does not mean indifference. It does not mean coldness. It means refusing to outsource your inner stability. You can care without compliance. You can understand without submitting. You can empathize without sacrificing yourself. This is Stoic strength, and it is rare, which is why those who practice it are so difficult to manipulate. Preparing for the final shift. In the final part, we will bring all of this together. We will explore how to live among difficult people without becoming like them, how to maintain moral clarity in a culture that rewards manipulation, and how to protect your mind not by withdrawing from life, but by engaging it wisely. The Stoics did not promise safety. They promised resilience. And resilience begins when you stop confusing familiarity with trust and discomfort with danger. The most important battle, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, is not against others, but against the erosion of your own character. And that battle is still worth fighting. There is a dangerous myth that quietly shapes modern life. It says that if someone harms you repeatedly, the solution is to become harder, colder, or more aggressive. That strength means dominance. That protection means emotional armor. The Stoics rejected this completely. They believed that becoming reactive does not make you stronger. It makes you predictable. And predictability is exactly what manipulative people exploit. True strength for a Stoic was not found in retaliation, but in moral clarity. Why anger feels powerful, and why it isn't. When you realize you've been manipulated, controlled, or deceived, anger often follows. Anger feels energizing. It sharpens your focus. It gives you a sense of justice. But Seneca, who wrote an entire treatise on anger, warned that anger is the most dangerous emotion precisely because it disguises itself as strength. Anger narrows perception. It accelerates judgment. It replaces reason with impulse. An angry person feels powerful, but is actually easier to provoke, easier to steer, and easier to exhaust. This is why manipulative people often want you to become angry. If you explode, they become calm. If you accuse, they appear reasonable. If you react emotionally, they gain narrative control. The Stoic response is not suppression. It is distance. Distance between stimulus and response. Distance between insult and identity. Distance between behavior and meaning. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when someone acts badly toward you, the first question is not, "How dare they?" but, "What kind of person does this behavior reveal?" That shift changes everything. Seeing people clearly without hatred. Stoicism is often misunderstood as cold or detached. In reality, it demands radical honesty. The Stoics did not excuse harmful behavior, but they refused to personalize it. They believed that people who manipulate, lie, or control are not powerful. They are internally disordered. They are driven by fear, appetite, and insecurity. This does not make their actions acceptable, but it makes them predictable. And predictability is liberating. When you stop expecting empathy from someone incapable of it, disappointment fades. When you stop expecting honesty from someone committed to deception, confusion disappears. You no longer negotiate with illusions. You deal with reality. Moral asymmetry. Why you feel more. One of the most painful realizations is this: you often feel more than they do. You reflect, you doubt, you replay conversations. They move on. This feels unfair, and it is. But the Stoics reframed this completely. They believed that moral sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a cost of virtue. A person who feels nothing pays no price internally. A person who feels deeply must learn discipline, not numbness. Epictetus taught that the goal is not to stop feeling, but to stop being ruled by feeling. This is a critical distinction. Rebuilding trust in yourself. After prolonged exposure to manipulation or control, many people lose confidence in their own judgment. They ask others to confirm decisions. They hesitate before acting. They second-guess instincts. The Stoics saw this as the most serious injury, because once you no longer trust your own reason, you become dependent on external authority. The remedy is not affirmation, it is practice. You rebuild self-trust through small, consistent acts of alignment. You say no and survive it. You set a boundary and observe the outcome. You act according to principle, not outcome. Each time you do this, your nervous system recalibrates. You remember, I can endure discomfort without collapse. That knowledge is freedom. The Stoic test of character. The Stoics believed that every interaction tests character, not the other person's, but yours. When someone lies, the question becomes, will you lie to yourself? When someone manipulates, the question becomes, will you abandon your values for peace? When someone controls, the question becomes, will you trade autonomy for approval? These tests are not dramatic. They are quiet, and they happen daily. Character for the Stoics was not built in grand moments, but in repeated, private decisions. Living among the unjust without becoming one of them. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire filled with corruption, betrayal, and cruelty. His meditations were written not from comfort, but from proximity to power and deceit. And yet, his conclusion was clear. You do not need to become like others to survive among them. You need boundaries, not bitterness. You need principles, not paranoia. You need awareness, not withdrawal. This is especially relevant today, in workplaces that reward self-promotion over substance, in social environments that confuse confidence with character, in relationships where intensity is mistaken for intimacy. Stoicism does not ask you to leave society. It teaches you how to remain yourself within it. The discipline of assent. One of the most powerful Stoic concepts is the discipline of assent. It means this: just because a thought appears in your mind does not mean it deserves your agreement. He made me feel small. She controls everything. I'll never recover from this. These thoughts feel real, but they are interpretations. The Stoics trained themselves to pause before accepting any judgment. Is this objectively true? Is this useful? Is this within my control? This pause creates space, and space is where choice lives. Choosing peace over victory. Many people want closure. They want apologies. They want acknowledgement. They want the other person to understand. The Stoics warned that this desire can keep you trapped, because it gives power to someone who has already shown they misuse it. Peace does not require agreement. It requires disengagement from false expectations. Sometimes the most dignified response is silence, not passive silence, but deliberate withdrawal of energy. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop performing. This is not avoidance. It is alignment. What remains when the noise fades? When control dissolves, when manipulation loses access, something strange happens. There is emptiness, not loneliness, but space. At first, this space feels uncomfortable. You were used to reacting. You were used to managing tension. You were used to vigilance. Now there is quiet. The Stoics believed this quiet was not a void, but a return to reason, a return to agency, a return to self-respect. From this place, you can choose relationships deliberately, not based on intensity, not based on charm, not based on fear, but based on consistency, respect, and shared values. We will explore how Stoic wisdom applies not just to avoiding harmful people, but to becoming someone who cannot be easily harmed. We will reflect on responsibility, compassion without self-betrayal, and how to live with open eyes and a steady mind. And we will close with a reminder the Stoics considered sacred. No one can damage your character without your cooperation. That cooperation can be withdrawn, calmly, firmly, and without hatred. And when it is, something remarkable happens. You stop surviving and start governing your life again. There is a quiet realization that arrives when all illusions finally fall away. It is not dramatic. It does not feel victorious. It feels steady. You understand something simple and irreversible. Some people are not confused. They are not misunderstood. They are not temporarily lost. They have chosen a way of being that places power above virtue, control above connection, and self-interest above reason. The Stoics never asked us to hate such people. They asked us not to become them. The difference between compassion and exposure. One of the most common traps intelligent, ethical people fall into is overexposure. They believe that understanding someone obligates them to endure them. The Stoics rejected this logic completely. Marcus Aurelius wrote that while we are born for cooperation, we are not born for abuse. Cooperation requires mutual respect. Abuse requires silence. Compassion does not mean unlimited access. It means accurate perception without malice. You can understand why someone is the way they are, and still choose distance. You can recognize their wounds without allowing them to wound you. This distinction is the cornerstone of Stoic maturity. Becoming difficult to manipulate. The goal of Stoicism was never to eliminate pain. It was to eliminate unnecessary suffering. And most suffering caused by harmful people comes from three internal habits: the need to be liked, the need to be understood, the need to be validated. Manipulative people exploit these needs relentlessly. They withdraw approval. They distort understanding. They ration validation. But when these needs loosen their grip, manipulation loses its leverage. A Stoic does not ask, "Do they approve of me?" They ask, "Am I acting in accordance with my values?" This shift is subtle, but absolute. Reputation versus character. One of the most radical Stoic ideas is this: your reputation does not belong to you. It lives in the minds of others, and anything that lives outside your control is not worth sacrificing your integrity for. This is why manipulative people rely on threats to reputation. They imply judgment. They suggest exclusion. They weaponize perception. The Stoics were unmoved by this. Epictetus taught that if someone speaks badly of you without cause, the only tragedy would be if they were correct. If they are wrong, their words are noise. If they are right, your task is correction, not defensiveness. In both cases, panic is unnecessary. The final test: power without corruption. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When you recognize manipulation, when you regain clarity, when you establish boundaries, you gain power. And power always brings temptation. The temptation to punish, the temptation to humiliate, the temptation to win. The Stoics warned that this is the final test of character. Will you use your clarity to dominate or to disengage? Will you mirror the behavior you escaped or transcend it? True victory for a Stoic was not reversal of roles. It was refusal to play the game at all. Why silence is sometimes the loudest response. In a culture that rewards reaction, silence feels like weakness. But the Stoics understood silence differently. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not absence. It is containment. It denies manipulative people what they crave most: emotional participation. No arguments to twist, no anger to exploit, no explanations to distort. Silence is not withdrawal from truth. It is withdrawal from futility. Living with open eyes. Stoicism does not make you naive. It makes you observant. You still see charm, but you look for consistency. You still hear words, but you track actions. You still feel emotion, but you don't surrender authority to it. This is not cynicism. It is clarity without bitterness. The Stoics believed bitterness was a sign of attachment, not wisdom. When you are no longer attached to changing others, bitterness fades. The responsibility of awareness. Once you see clearly, there is no return to innocence. You notice patterns everywhere, at work, in leadership, in media, in relationships. This awareness is not a burden, but it carries responsibility. You become responsible for what you tolerate, for what you normalize, for what you excuse. And this is where Stoicism becomes not just personal, but ethical. Because how you respond teaches others what is acceptable. The quiet standard you set. When you refuse to participate in manipulation, something interesting happens. Some people drift away. Some become hostile. Some try harder. But a few quietly adjust. They lower their volume. They sharpen their honesty. They respect your boundaries, not because you demanded it, because you embodied it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best way to correct others is to live correctly yourself. What Stoicism ultimately offers. Stoicism does not promise comfort. It offers dignity. It does not promise control over others. It offers sovereignty over self. And it does not promise a world free of harmful people. It offers a mind that cannot be colonized by them. This is not emotional detachment. It is ethical independence. A final reflection. If you have made it this far, you are not a casual viewer. You are someone who reflects, someone who questions, someone who values depth over noise. And that matters, because ideas like these only survive when thoughtful people engage with them, not passively, but deliberately. If this reflection clarified something for you, consider staying connected to this space, not out of obligation, but alignment. If you believe these ideas deserve more visibility, a small signal of appreciation helps more than you might think. And if there is one person in your life, a close friend, who would genuinely benefit from this perspective, sharing this conversation with them might spark something meaningful, not agreement, but reflection. And if you choose to leave a comment, let it be thoughtful, not for attention, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the work behind these ideas. The Stoics believed that wisdom grows in dialogue. Thank you for being part of it. And remember, you cannot always choose who enters your life, but you can always choose who governs your mind.